Jay Dobyns was a federal agent for 27 years before retiring in 2014. Jay is perhaps best known for his landmark effort against the notorious Hells Angels. He was the first ever lawman to defeat the gang's multi-layered security, getting inside to become a member of their legendary Skull Valley Charter. Jay's book about that investigation, No Angel, My Harrowing Undercover Journey to the Inner Circle of the Hells Angels, is a New York Times and international bestseller. A defense attorney once described Jay as a government-trained predator, repeatedly sent on seek and destroy missions in search of drugs, guns, and violence, with instructions to succeed at any cost and without regard for the agent himself or those he crossed his path with. His follow-up book, Catching Hell, A True Story of Abandonment and Betrayal, is a best-selling memoir that details the events of his life and career. Jay's Catching Hell training for law enforcement groups and his Dent the Universe program for corporate audiences are delivered nationwide. You can contact Jay at j@jdobyns.com.
Yeah, I was, like as a kid, I never had a plan B. I had always planned on being a football player. And I had a very good high school career. I had a good college career. When it came time for my opportunities professionally, I realized the hard way I wasn't as good as I thought I was, to be quite honest. And I didn't have a plan B. And at the time, it sounds a little bit hokey actually, but at the time, the television show, Miami Vice, was very popular. And as an audience, we had never seen a cop show like that before. All the police shows had been very procedural, uniformed cops and detective type shows, reacting to crime scenes. And then Miami Vice shows up, and Sonny Crockett's wearing a Hugo Boss suit, and he's driving a Lamborghini around South Beach, and he's being proactive. He's trying to get out in front of crimes in a covert undercover capacity. And that was, it intrigued me. Like, actually, Hollywood sucked me into believing what that life was like. I learned the hard way that it's something very much other than what Hollywood and television portrays it to be. But I got on with ATF, and I wanted to go to ATF because they had the most dynamic and widespread, thorough undercover program in federal law enforcement.
Okay.
Really, like people think ATF is just chasing guns, but man, we were like involved in all types of violent crime, gun crime, explosives crime, organized crime, gangs, street crime, and our undercover program was a tool that was used to investigate those aspects of the crime world. And it was a perfect fit for me, for what I wanted to do or what I had hopes for.
So you were completely sold on being a UC from the very beginning. There was never even a consideration of going to a local department and being patrol. It was UC was what it was.
I knew that I wanted to try it, to be quite honest with you. I didn't know if I'd be any good at it. But I wanted to try, and I'm not sure that I've necessarily been good at anything in my life other than I've always been willing to try. I've always been willing to take chances. The fear of failure is it's a motivator, but it's not something that ever kept me from doing something I wanted to do. For the fear of not being successful at it, I was always willing to try. So I knew I wanted to pursue that and see if I could be good at it, and it was just the perfect place for me to do that at.
So how long did it take you to get into that UC role? Was there a time frame where you had to be a field agent first?
I started actually pretty quick because I made it known to my training officers and to the people that I was working for and with what I wanted to do. And I sought every opportunity I could. I raised my hand for every assignment, no matter how small, no matter how insignificant. I wanted to touch it. I wanted to learn. I wanted to get next to people who were doing it and doing it well, and see what aspects of of their style and their personality and their character used and how it worked for them and all those things. And so it didn't matter to me if I was covering a UC deal, if I was a background guy, if I was listening to a wire. I just wanted to touch every aspect of that world that I could to try to learn.
Now, you had an interesting first couple of days before, I believe, before you ever even went to, I don't know what, I guess maybe FLETC or wherever the ATF guys go for their initial training. So I believe it was day 4. Is that correct? Can you take people through that day 4?
Yeah, I got hired on a Monday, signed my paperwork, got sworn in. I hadn't been to an academy. To be honest with you, there was no law enforcement in my family. I was never an outdoorsman or anything. I'd never held a gun. I'd never handled a firearm before. So I get hired on a Monday. On a Thursday, by circumstance, I end up in an arrest situation where I end up getting taken hostage. I was taken hostage by a guy that we were trying to arrest this cat, and he ran from us. And I chased after him and lost him, and he disappeared and then popped back up. I didn't know what I was doing. He popped back up, got behind me, held a gun to my head, forced me into a vehicle, and I was shot in the back, point blank in the back. The round went through my lung. It narrowly missed my heart. It was a through and through. It exited my chest. So 4 days on the job with this ideal, with this Miami Vice ideal of what this life was going to be like. 4 days later, I was bleeding to death, like laying in the dog shit of a trailer park, with blood coming out of my chest like you're holding your thumb over a garden hose. Mm-hmm. I remember laying there, and there was this giant pool of blood growing around me, and this crinkled up old Doritos bag like blew through the blood and kind of stuck in the blood and then blew past. And like with ATF, we get paid every 2 weeks. I hadn't gotten a paycheck yet. I was dying in the dirt and garbage of this trailer park, and I hadn't even gotten paid yet.
There must have been a supervisor somewhere just shitting themselves.
Well, I'll tell you what, an interesting backstory to that, and one that I'm proud of. I got to the hospital. I had an amazing trauma surgeon. My trauma surgeon, who was the lead trauma surgeon in Tucson, Arizona at the time, ultimately became the Surgeon General of the United States under President Bush. His name's Dr. Richard Carmona.
Oh, wow.
And he was a trauma surgeon, a police officer, a SWAT operator. He understood our world, and a truly amazing man, right? So he fixed me up, and I'm in the hospital, and I've got like a tube down my throat, and I've got a chest tube and catheters and cameras like in my groin and all kinds of wires and stuff hooked up to me. And attorneys started lining up at the hospital wanting to take my case, trying to sell me, to let me allow them to sue the government. Their argument was, you've not been trained, you were not prepared for this, the government has placed themselves in a compromising position. They have a huge amount of liability for allowing this to happen to you. How much, they were telling me, how much money do you want? You want $1 million? You want $5 million? Like, these attorneys are telling me, like, I can get generational money for you. Where you will never have to work again. Neither will anybody in your family if you handle it properly. Because the government wants to make you and this situation go away. It's embarrassing to them. It's humiliating to them that they allowed this to happen to a new agent. Tell me how much money you want, and I will go get it for you, and you'll never see a courtroom. No one's going to argue this. They're going to sign the check for whatever you want. And to be honest with you, like, my answer was very quick and very simple. Like, I wanted them out of my room. I didn't want, that was never my interest. And and the people in your audience know that none of us that ever took a badge or a gun took it for money.
Sure.
We never took it for fame or fortune or claim or praise or the thought of writing a book or having a movie made,
Yeah.
or television shows. No one ever thinks that. All I wanted to do was go back to work and try to do it the right way and try to do it better and try to do it without the mistakes.
So how old are you at this time?
I was 26 years old at that time.
26. I especially nowadays, I find it hard to believe that a lot of 26-year-olds that still ain't got that paycheck yet would make that decision.
Well, I'll tell you what, I grew up in a blue collar home. My dad was a carpenter. My dad pounded nails for a living till the day he died. My mom was a house cleaner. My mom scrubbed people's toilets for a living that didn't want to scrub their own toilets. We never had much. I never needed much. And I was never motivated, still am not motivated by money. $1 million or $5 million or $10 million was as meaningless to me then, 30 plus years ago, as it is today. I'll still never see that. I'll still never know what it feels like to have that kind of money, and I don't chase it.
Sure. So was there a Jay Dobyns policy enacted after the hostage situation?
There was there was a couple situations that took place in that window of time, like over the course of a couple years at ATF, where very young agents were involved in some traumatic, violent situations. And, the agency came out with a policy that you were not allowed to be involved in any enforcement actions without a senior training officer with you. And to be quite honest with you, we had a very young group of agents. None of us paid attention to it. None of us cared what that policy said. None of us cared what the rule was. Oh, you can't go do this. We were all going to go do it because none of us took the job to sit on the sidelines and have someone hold our hand, to be quite honest with you.
Right. It's typically that type of personality too that kind of flourishes in that type of position.
Well, and at that time, we're talking about 30 plus years ago. The ignoring or failing to pay attention to policies, like today, will get you terminated. You'll lose your job for it today. Back 30 years ago, some of the things we did that our bosses maybe shook their head at, but maybe thought was funny.
Yeah.
Today, no one thinks is funny. No one is entertained by it. You'll lose your job. So us, those young agents who were just charging forward and kind of ignoring the rules, in a way, it was admired because of our drive. Today, it will get you terminated.
So was there ever a moment after you got shot that you're laying there like, man, what the hell am I doing? Like, maybe I should just go find a regular job. Maybe my dad needs some help. Was there ever that moment? Did you ever not think, hey, I'm not going back? Or was it just...
No, I knew I was going back, and to be honest with you, the exact opposite happened. I was empowered by that situation. I felt like I was invincible. I felt like I was bulletproof. I had just had a bullet go through my chest and lived to tell about it and was motivated to come back to work and try again. Man, I felt like I was the baddest cat on the streets.
Right. So you get out of the hospital, you heal up. I'm assuming you go through the academy, everything works out, and not long after that, you're starting your undercover career.
Yeah, baby steps. No one jumps into some large-scale, long-term undercover operation cold-footed and at least expects to have any level of success. Everything from buying street dope, buying dime bags at the park and on the street corner and 8 balls, which ultimately grew to buying cartel dope, through training and experience, buying some Saturday night special pea shooter, buying some sawed-off shotgun that some guy had cut down, up to, shoulder-launched missiles ultimately, buying homemade tweaker pipe bombs that some meth head is building in his mom's garage up to servo-activated remote control C4 devices. You know, you start small like anything, and you
Sure.
gain your expertise and you gain your confidence, and you build your comfort in who you are and how you're portraying yourself. And then with time and experience and all those things, you know, your skills elevate to the point where, you know, ultimately I was doing murder for hire cases and home invasion infiltrations and gang infiltrations and more complex long-term cases. But it took a while to get there. It took time and patience to get there.
So as you started to develop that UC skill set, and I'm assuming you start building up a pretty good reputation for yourself with the ATF, was that reputation what caught the people's attention or the case agents to bring you in for Operation Black Biscuit?
Yeah, you know what? I had about 15 years of street undercover experience when
Okay,
that
wow.
opportunity came. So I had seen and done quite a bit, and I had an established reputation as an undercover operative. Now, the case agent was a personal friend of mine, and when
Okay.
he approached me and wanted to make an undercover run at the Hells Angels, to be honest with you, my reaction to him as his friend, as a peer, as someone who was motivated to see the case be a success was, I told him, I can probably name 10 or 15 agents off the top of my head who will serve you better in the role that you want played for this case. I was not a biker investigator. I was not an expert on outlaw motorcycle gangs. I played this like white trash, Peckerwood, like drug running, gun running, debt collecting, hitman thug, right?
Yeah.
That's much different. It's much different than being an outlaw biker. There's similarities, but there's big differences. And there was agents that I knew who had specialized in outlaw motorcycle gangs and biker work. And I felt like they would maybe give this case a better chance than I would as the lead. But the case agent he was confident in me, and he had faith in me, and he wanted me to try. And it goes back to like what I said earlier, man. I was always willing to try. I was always willing to give it a shot, you know? And so that's what I did. I did the best I could. And I had days where I made mistakes and screwed things up, and I had days where I found success. And just every day was a new challenge.
Yeah, 50% of anything is just showing up.
It is. It's so much of, in our job, so much of our success is between the ears. It's mentally, emotionally, spiritually, where you're at in your headspace, and believing in yourself. Because if I don't believe in me, or if I don't believe in the cover story that I'm portraying, or the persona that I'm putting out there, if I don't believe it, if it's not in my heart, how am I going to make you believe it? How do I expect for you to sell you on it if I don't believe it, right? So much of that is the internal brainwashing that goes on, telling ourselves, you can do this, you can do it.
So how do you go through the prep to take on a role like that, knowing that at the time no one had ever done or infiltrated the Hells Angels? How long is the process to get ready for that?
Well, you know, we had an enormous amount of backstopping. I had an established cover story that was already accepted in the criminal community. I'd established it in certain areas. We had an amazing undercover branch that did incredible backstopping to solidify my story and back it up. During the course of the Hells Angels investigation, on 3 separate occasions, the Hells Angels ran private investigators at me, unbeknownst to me, behind my back. Those private investigators came back to the Hells Angels and confirmed everything that I had told the Hells Angels. So their own private investigators were actually enhancing my credibility. They were confirming independently what I said, because my backstopping was so elaborate. So that was huge, and that adds to that element of comfort and confidence that you're out there spinning your lie, but you know that there's teeth behind it.
Now, why would they pick you to follow around with their private investigators? Is that something they do for everybody?
I don't think, it's not my experience that they do that for everybody. At least at that point in time, they weren't doing it for everybody. But I was making progress fast. Um, the process of befriending people and being acclimated and warming up to people was very accelerated. And so they're a uniquely paranoid group of people. Um, they don't survive and thrive in their world and stay out of jail and stay out of prison by trusting people very quickly. It takes time, and they go through their process. And their paranoia is what allows them to function in their world.
Right.
And so they were just feeding their own paranoia. They were just trying to satisfy their own curiosity. Like, is this someone that we should trust? Is this someone that we can believe in?
How did you get on their radar? How is it? Because there's not an application process per se. You don't fill out an application.
No, you don't go knock on the clubhouse door and ask to fill out their paperwork.
Right.
But part of the reason why the case agent wanted me is that I had already been operating in their area and had an established reputation in the criminal community.
Okay.
And so I wasn't starting entirely from scratch. And then part of the scheme was there was actually 2 gang infiltrations within Operation Black Biscuit. We first basically extorted, muscled our way into a smaller biker gang that was based in Tijuana, Mexico, called the Solo Angels. And the Solo Angels were poor, they were kind of pathetic, they were trying to make their name, trying to make their way. And me and a couple of other agents went to the Solo Angels with the help of an informant, and basically said, we're going to be Solo Angels in Arizona. We are going to represent your gang, your pathetic little pitiful gang, and we are going to get you next to the most powerful outlaw motorcycle gang the world has ever known. We are going to be your brokers for that. And that opportunity for the Solo Angels was intriguing. Like, they had someone now who was going to introduce them and allow them to step up and play with the big boys. So we used that Solo Angel affiliation and used their patch, not to investigate their crime, because they were committing crimes too, but to use it to as credibility in the eyes of the Hells Angels that we were already a part of that world.
Okay. So knowing how paranoid the Hells Angels are, there's got to be in the back of Jay Bird's mind that almost a paranoia for you, looking around trying to figure out what do they know, what do they don't know, is this, is something up, are they on to me? How do you turn it off, if you can turn it off, and be Jay Bird 100% in the moment?
Well, that is probably one of the things that I wasn't very good at. And it was probably one of the things that I failed at. In hindsight, I didn't really realize I was failing at the time, but I wasn't good at stepping out of that role. I wasn't good at not being Jay Bird Davis. I'll give you an example. I'd been on the road for a couple weeks, and this is over the course of years of undercover operations, right? And I came home, and my wife told me, she said, you cannot walk in this house whenever you feel like it and treat me and the kids like we are your people on the street. That's not going to fly. And then in my self-defense at that point in time, I told her, I am not a light switch. I can't turn this guy on and off. I have to be on all the time. People that do what I do for a living and don't take it serious and treat it like a hobby end up dead. I'm not a light switch. And then her response was, well, when you come to this house, you better install a dimmer switch and dial that attitude down. And if you can't, don't come back.
Right. Oh, man. So, I mean, it takes a toll on the family as well. I mean, because you were in that capacity for a long time. And, I mean, so the wife is, she is an unspoken hero kind of in the mix being, because, I mean, she could have added an entirely different element to stressing your life out if you didn't have that support at home, right?
I had huge support, and to be honest with you, of all this, of my career. And there's things that I accomplished that I'm proud of, But there's also things that I regret and that I'm ashamed of, and that it's embarrassing for me to tell an audience, people out there that I don't know, who don't know me, that I failed my family in this process. Chasing what I believed was a legacy, chasing this hero syndrome where I felt like I was out there handling America's violent crime business on behalf of, good and innocent people. In that process, I betrayed and abandoned my own family, my own wife and kids. And I didn't treat them very good during that point in time in my life. And that's not a pleasant thing to have to admit to yourself or about yourself. But if I didn't say that, if I didn't answer your question that way, then everything else I say to you or your audience would be counterfeit. Like, if I don't answer your questions transparently and honestly and give truthful answers to the people that are listening, then, like, all of us, every one of us on this job can go out there and tell hero stories. We all have stories of arrests and shootings and seizures and busts and convictions and amazing dynamic professional events. Everybody has those. But a lot of us have failed events too. And if all we talk about is the hero days, then I'm not serving you. I'm not serving your audience. I'm not being a very good witness or giving a very good testimony to what our life is like if I sugarcoat some of the hard things.
Sure. No, and I think people appreciate that. I think for people like yourself, I think that when the people they see that sincerity, and it makes everything you say then becomes more honest. They believe the stories even more.
Well, I'll tell you things that you might not want to hear or you might not like, but I'll tell you the truth. And if I tell you the truth and it makes you uncomfortable or you don't like it, that's something that I have to live with.
So, were there ever any close calls to being outed as law enforcement, like that left you going, "Whew, that was close"?
Yeah, there was several times. One in particular, the solo angels who we had been using and cheating off of for our cover story. A couple members of that gang went to some members of the Hells Angels and said, "You know what? You got to keep an eye on these guys. Like, the way they came in here on us, the way that they kind of muscled their way in and extorted their way in. And then after they got what they wanted from us, we didn't see them again. They never followed up with us." It drew a lot of skepticism. I was actually put in a situation where I was called out and had to meet with some members of the Hells Angels where I actually believed I was walking into an assassination, to be quite honest with you. And it was just like, when those situations come up, man, you have to think fast and talk fast and lie fast. And I relied on all this previous interaction I had had with the Hells Angels to validate my credibility, to overcome their doubts, so that potential compromise to the cover, which at the time probably felt like it was the end of the case, like this is an unsurvivable event in this investigation, was actually able to turn the tables on them. Because when I reassured them as to who I was and reminded them of all the things they knew about me to be true, the confrontation came, but it was actually an ultimatum saying, you are either going to go all in with us, the Hells Angels, or you're all the way out, and we never want to see your face again. And so, like, actually the tables were turned where the ultimatum worked to our advantage.
Yeah, because that was the ultimate goal, right? Was to get in with those guys. And so whenever they say you're coming with us, basically at that moment you just became a prospect.
I did, and there was that brought its own problems, because now we lost our independence. We lost our ability to be where we wanted to be when we wanted to be there, and to show up at events like on our time frame and our timetable with our own agenda to serve. Now we were serving somebody else's time frame and somebody else's timetable and their agenda. And so it was a double-edged sword. We were getting closer, but we were losing control.
So during this entire period, how are you gaining evidence on these guys? Are you literally writing supplements and kind of keeping a diary? Because back then, I feel like the technology, which is very covert nowadays, but did you ever just carry around a tape recorder? Or I mean, I can't imagine that you would be wired up all the time with as paranoid as those guys are.
Yeah, I didn't have electronics on me all the time, but I was wired at times. I was making recordings at times, which is the difficult part for anybody in any undercover role, to be quite honest with you. People look at like this sexy, glamorous side of what they believe it to be, of living the life of a criminal, but playing on the good guy's side.
Yeah.
What they don't understand is that if you want to do that, your day actually starts off, like before the criminal's day does, your day starts off as a cop. And you're meeting with your team, and you're planning and doing your operational plans, and you're trying to figure out like where you're going to go that day, who you're going to meet, what you're going to try to accomplish. Then you flip out of that role into your undercover role, and whether that lasts for an hour or days or weeks at a time, you're in that. Then at the end of that period of time, when the suspects go home and go to sleep and go do whatever it is they do, see their families, get rest, whatever it is, you're still on the job. Now you have to write reports. You have to translate notes. You have to debrief your team. You have to log evidence. You have to transcribe tapes. And then hopefully try to catch a little bit of sleep before it starts all over again. It is a challenge, like mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, to stay in the game for that length of time over and over like that.
So did you have a case agent where you would kind of check in with them daily? And did you have a cover team with you at all times in some capacity?
I had a cover team. I didn't have it with me at all times. We had multiple UCs involved in operations, so sometimes we served as our own cover team with multiple UCs and kept an eye on each other. There were times when there were external cover teams. I did have a case agent that I checked in with sometimes daily, sometimes not as frequently, to transfer evidence, to pass information, to pass notes, to write reports. It was very well orchestrated. We had an off-site undercover office that we used, and I had multiple undercover houses that I used. We had drop points, almost like CIA spy type operations at times, where we were dropping, making covert drops that were being picked up by someone else to avoid interaction or overlap with traditional law enforcement. So it was complex.
Holy shit, man. And I couldn't imagine after this, how much more paranoid they are nowadays, which I'm sure they're still doing their thing, and Sons of Anarchy didn't help matters, because as soon as Jax Teller comes out, everybody wants to be him and Opie, and so I feel like that just fanned the flames of the OMGs and that kind of thing.
Well, the outlaw motorcycle gang culture, it's a part of Americana.
Sure.
It's like gangs and mafias come to the United States because there's money to be made here and there's freedom to operate here. Outlaw biker gangs are America's export to the world. There's biker gangs all over the world that vibe started in the United States. And so, like Americana, there's elements of society that are intrigued by law enforcement and cop stories and infiltrations and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. There's an equal or maybe even greater number of people in society who are intrigued by the bad boys, who want to live on the other side of the gang, who want to try to outsmart the cops and who want to, be part of the cat and mouse game. It's personal choices.
So, just kind of going off on a side note here, what did you think about the Sons of Anarchy? Was there any realism to it at all?
I thought it was entertaining. I thought there was some good storylines. I thought there were some good characters. I thought there were elements of the story that felt truthful and that were based in reality. But like any television show, they're trying to they're compressed for time. And the demand on them to entertain us is huge. That's how they develop a popular program. So I felt like a lot of it went out of bounds, was too much of a reach of my imagination or reality. But nonetheless, there's a huge part of our society that's intrigued by that world, and I get it. I get it. I like it. It's not offensive to me. I watched the show. I wasn't. I can't say that I was a diehard fan, but right. I watched the show. Yeah.
Going back to the Hells Angels being a global conglomerate almost of OMGs, whenever you're looking at Hells Angels on the West Coast versus the East Coast, I know from the blood cases that I've worked, there's a significant difference between East Coast Bloods and West Coast Bloods. Is there a uniqueness to each region of the Hells Angels around the United States and kind of the globe?
I think there is. From my personal observation, I felt like the East Coast Hells Angels had more of a traditional organized crime vibe to them, more like a mafia, like a La Cosa Nostra feel about them. Maybe from the world that they grew up in, and that's what they were most comfortable with and maybe admiring of. I felt like as you went west to the West Coast, there was more of a hip hop, younger vibe to the Hells Angels. You saw, you go out west, you see Hells Angels with skateboards bungee corded to their motorcycles, and you see, you see Hells Angels with Bermuda shorts and like high white socks and that kind of like a street gangster vibe to them, and then you go north in North America, you go to Canada, and they're like straight businessmen. It is a money-making machine in Canada. And so just even in North America, there's different vibes to the gang within the different parts of the country or the continent that they operate in.
Are they all equally violent, or is there a more violent region than another?
I think they're all capable of extreme violence, but I think it's also very much inspired by individuals. Not every Hells Angel I met, not every person with a Hells Angel patch on their back was a murderer or a rapist or a drug dealer or a gun runner. There were some that were more mild than others. There were some that were extremely out of control and violent. What happens, though, is that oftentimes an individual inspires the group, and you get that wrong combination of personalities, and you get a wild card in there, and you might not be hyper aggressive. You might not be hyper violent. But when all your boys are spinning up, you better get that way, or instead of you beating somebody's ass, it's going to be your ass that's getting beat.
Right. So was there ever a violent encounter or moment that you thought to yourself, I'm going to have to step out and expose myself to save this person, or just basically out yourself as an agent?
There were plenty of violent situations over that period of time, like all, from shootings to stabbings to beatings to, but like well before I took the Hells Angels case, like very early on in my undercover life, there were three elements to the job that I had decided that I would come out of role to resolve. I was not going to watch someone murdered in my presence. I was not going to watch a woman be raped in my presence. And I was not going to watch a kid be beaten in my presence. And I thought, like, everything else I will figure out on the fly.
Right.
And I didn't have the answers. I don't even know that I have the answers now. But those were the three things where I felt like if I'm stuck in that situation, that is something that I have to come out of role for, to try to do the right thing, to be a lawman, to protect the public. But for example, there were fights, and when fights would break out, I would try to fight my way to the center of the fight. I would try to get to the victim in a headlock, and throw some legitimate punches on the victim's head. Like I wanted to be believable. But my ultimate goal was not to punch the victim. My ultimate goal was to secure his head, secure his neck, and keep him from getting a steel-toed boot in the forehead and giving him brain damage or killing him. Is that the right solution? Man, I don't know. I don't know that it is or it isn't. It was my solution.
I mean, that's thinking on your feet, though. I mean, doing what you got to do, and at the same time, God, you still have the mindset to protect him. But I mean, I can see how that will be a believable scenario.
I'll tell you this: if every time a fight broke out, if I had to come out of role, our case would have lasted a week instead of 2 years.
Is there a lot of infighting, or is it more of it on the outside?
It's more on the outside, but yeah, there is some. There is some. It's like any group of people. You put a big group of people together, not everybody loves everybody else, regardless of what their common denominator is. Like, personalities get in the way, and politics get in the way, and power gets in the way, and money gets in the way. And all those things have different, they motivate people in different ways. And so, sure, there was infighting. There was angels that didn't care for each other, or probably in the end, they would probably always stick up for each other and have each other's back. But to say that everybody agreed or saw eye to eye on how to run the gang or the decisions that were being made, it'd be no different than if you put a group of cops together, or if you put a group of school teachers or doctors, or mechanics or landscapers. They're never going to all agree.
So how long were you in that role? How long did Black Biscuit last?
That case lasted just short of 2 years.
Wow. So what was it? Was there a specific moment or crime where you guys were like, boom, we got them, we're done with this now, finally, and could step away? Like, what made the decision to end it?
There were a couple factors. Fatigue, and fatigue was a part of it, to be quite honest with you. But the ultimate motivating factor for the shot callers was the level of violence that we were operating next to and within and around was just, it was so out of control. During the course of those 2 years, there was 8 or 10 Hells Angels that I had known or become close to who were murdered in various situations. The gang wars between the gangs was immense. To be quite honest with you, I had gotten to a point in my infiltration where I was no longer worried about the Hells Angels. I believe that I had built their loyalty and built their trust. In some instances, had probably obtained their love to the point where if something bad happened, they would have defended me. There was guys that would have stepped in front of a bullet for Jay Davis. What I was worried about were two things: the outside gang violence. We were in the middle of the Hells Angels Mongols war at the time. So to think that we wouldn't be at a party, or I would be working security, or be standing at a front door somewhere, and someone wouldn't roll up a pipe bomb or a hand grenade, or some Mongols wouldn't pop up out of the back of a pickup truck with AK-47s.
Yeah.
Those were real potential possibilities. And then the other aspect was the way these guys ride. They ride so hard and so fast and so tight that I was thinking to myself, man, I'm not going to get shot or stabbed. I'm going to end up riding my motorcycle into a telephone pole at 100 miles an hour. That's how it's going to end.
Did you ride a lot of motorcycles before you ever went into this role?
I had some riding experience. I was not an expert. I had to become an expert like very quickly, to be quite honest with you, because if you don't keep up, you will be left behind. And there was a lot of rides where, like, at the end of the day, like I had to like take a pair of pliers and pull my hands off the handle grips, because I was squeezing so tight, with those white knuckle rides with these guys. But that's part of life. That's everyday life for them.
So in this time span, you had to have become close to some of these guys, criminal or not. There's a human element, right? That you got to become like, hey, Frank's a shithead, but he's a nice guy in some moments. So did you have some of those guys? And did you ever talk to anybody once the case was over?
Yes and yes. In undercover work, you're never going to completely escape the human factor. You're interacting with human beings, and you're going to see elements of people that might be suspects in your case, that might even have committed bad acts or violent or evil acts that you are a witness to. But you also see elements to their personality that you like. There's it's like any group of people. There's people you like, there's people you don't like. And so that was no different. And I've ran into gang members after the case. Some of those interactions have been peaceful, some of them not so peaceful. I have members of the gang that I still have communications with, that I still have like some kind of loose, like respected association with. It's not like they're inviting me to come over to their house on Saturdays for a barbecue.
Sure.
But I can have an honest, open dialogue with them and have some respect there. Sure.
So how many ended up being arrested total?
If my numbers are correct, I think we indicted 55 suspects in our case. 55. I believe 16 of them were charged with RICO. And so it was, it was 24/7, 365 for 2 years of blood, sweat, and tears, 18, 20-hour days. And not just me, I get a lot of the credit for the success, but not just me. There was a whole task force of agents and officers who were working just as hard, just as long, taking just as much risk to try to accomplish what we did.
Can you talk about the threats that were made after the case was over? And can you talk a little bit about what happened to the house and that kind of thing?
Sure. So for 2 years, I had led, these people to believe that Jay Dobyns was a debt collector and a gun runner and a hitman. Well, when the case ended and through discovery, when they realized that Jay Dobyns isn't a debt collector, that he's actually Jay Dobyns, an ATF agent, then the death and the violence threats started coming. There was, threats to kidnap my kids. There was threats to videotape the gang rape of my wife. The Hells Angels held a murder contract on me. They farmed a contract on me to the Aryan Brotherhood, to the MS-13, to 18th Street in Los Angeles. They were offering money for my murder. There was plans to try to hit me with a AIDS-infected syringe. They were saying, like, man, stop trying to shoot this guy. Just give him the AIDS virus, man. He's going to die a slow, miserable death, and we won't be held accountable for it.
Jesus Christ.
And so ultimately, in the summer of 2008, my house was burned to the ground. I lost everything. Ultimately, the people that looked at the fire looked at the totality of evidence and circumstances and said, you know what, this was a failed assassination attempt. So there is,
Any idea what group?
well, the investigation was, in my opinion, not handled very well. It was not complete. I didn't think it wasn't thorough. Um, the situation with the threats on me and some of the lack of attention that were being paid to them, what became an embarrassment to my agency, and they just wanted me and the situation to go away. And so the way they chose to make it go away was to just ignore it. And it doesn't work that way. You can't just ignore it.
So what kind of effects does that have on you mentally, from the being shot at the very beginning, having an incredible career, but still a very stressful and kind of a living in fear kind of career all the time, and then having to deal with this aftermath? How does that affect somebody mentally, and how do you work through that?
Well, you know what? I think this job, when you do it in an aggressive, proactive way for an extended period of time, I really believe it changes our DNA. I really believe it alters who we are. It alters like how we look at the world. It alters how we look at people in society. It alters how we handle our relationships, how we treat our family. It can have a very negative impact on us, emotionally and spiritually. I know it did on me. I work really hard to not be that person. I try really hard to not be Jaybird. Jaybird thrived and survived in that world by not being a very pleasant person. I try to keep him buried, and I try to treat people. I try to just use the golden rule. I try to treat people the way I would want to be treated by them.
Sure.
And I try to conduct myself, graciously and with some humility. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes people will let you do that, sometimes they simply won't.
If you could go back, would you do it again?
I would. I would go back and I would do it again, but with a caveat. I would do it better. I would do it cleaner. I wouldn't make all the mistakes I made in my personal life, the bad choices. I wouldn't put the battle damage that I put on my family in the process. For me, I'm a person who wisdom always came to me right after I needed it. I would be wiser now, knowing what I know, like anybody, in hindsight. If you had a crystal ball to know what you were doing, what the end result was going to be, we would all make better decisions.
Sure.
But with hindsight, and now knowing what I know, yes, I would do it again. I always felt like, for us, for you, for the people in our business, I always felt like it was the ultimate honor for my community, for my agency, to give me a badge and a gun and to say, take care of us, keep us safe. I was always very flattered to be in a position to stand up for good and innocent people in my community who simply wanted to live safe and peaceful lives against the predators and the thugs who wanted to steal that from them. Mm-hmm. I took a great amount of pride in that. I still do. But it comes with a price. And that's what's frustrating, is that the price that's paid is many times it's not appreciated. Our lawmen and women out there do unthinkable things for ungrateful people. But you know what? That is the cost of doing business when you sign up for the job.
That's it.
Very rarely is anybody ever going to say thank you. Very rarely is anybody ever going to shake your hand or show you any appreciation. And which is where my love and respect for our profession comes from, in that men and women every day, cops around the country, they have an alarm clock goes off. and they put their feet on the ground, and they have a cup of coffee and eat a bowl of Cheerios, and they kiss their kids goodbye and kiss their husbands and wives goodbye with no promise or guarantee that they'll ever see them again. And they still go. They still buckle on their gear, and they still go to work to try to serve a greater good. And that is, I have a huge amount of respect and admiration for that, especially knowing that the world that they're going into today, where they're going to be disrespected, videotaped, lied about, spit on, shot at, stabbed, assaulted, and they still go.
Still go. So what's next for Jay Dobyns?
Well, I have a law enforcement training business that focuses on like survival mindset for lawmen.
Okay.
I get a lot of pleasure out of presenting that. I don't advertise. I don't promote. It's all word of mouth. I have a podcast like yourself called Copland, which is I try to promote the stories of others. It's not about me. It's the stories of other lawmen, first responders that are amazing and have done amazing things. I coach high school football.
Okay.
Which, to be honest with you, I get more out of it than I'm able to give back. You know, being around those kids keeps me young. And so, you know, those three things really keep me busy.
Well, Jay, I'm not going to keep you any longer. You are one badass American, my friend. I wish I had an ounce of the ice in my blood that you have in yours. But I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with me today, and I will hope to one day meet you in person and shake your hand and thank you for your service and everything.
Well, you know, those are kind words, and they're flattering words, and I thank you for that. But I think, you know, I look at myself, I think the way most of us do, is that I'm just a common man who is placed in some uncommon circumstances and situations, and we just do the best we can. And so thank you for those kind words, and they are appreciated. But I think all of us, we're just common men, like placed in uncommon situations and doing the best we can to help take care of people for the greater good. So, but thank you.
Jay Dobyns, everybody.